The neon lights of the International Hotel cast an eerie glow across Elvis Presley's dressing room as he stared at his reflection in the mirror. His black leather jacket hung lifeless on a chair, and the smell of hairspray mixed with the distant sound of slot machines from the casino floor below. It was August 15, 1968, and Elvis was 3 weeks into his Vegas comeback residency. The reviews had been mixed, the audiences polite but not electric. At 33, the king of rock and roll was beginning to wonder if his kingdom had crumbled while he wasn't paying attention. That's when his manager knocked on the door with news that would change everything. But Elvis had no idea that in exactly 47 minutes, he would meet a man who would make him question everything he thought he knew about music, about authenticity, and about himself.
Elvis, there's someone here to see you, Colonel Parker announced, adjusting his bow tie with that familiar scheming expression. Says he's a performer, goes by Tiny Tim, heard about your residency and wants to pay his respects. Elvis looked up from his rhinestone jumpsuit, already exhausted from another night of Love Me Tender and Don't Be Cruel. The same songs, the same moves, the same audiences of middle-aged tourists who remembered when he was dangerous. Tiny Tim? Elvis raised an eyebrow. What kind of name is that? He's some kind of midget act. The colonel chuckled. No, he's actually quite tall. Strange fellow. Long hair, plays a ukulele, sings in this high voice like a woman. Real oddball, but he's been making some noise in New York on television shows and such. Might be worth meeting for publicity purposes. Elvis sighed. Another freak show performer looking for his blessing, probably wanting to ride his coattails to fame. He'd met dozens of them over the years. 5 minutes, Colonel. I've got another show in 2 hours. The man who walked into Elvis's dressing room looked like he'd stepped out of a time machine from 1925. Tall and gangly, with wild curly hair that fell past his shoulders, wearing a peculiar checkered suit that had seen better decades. In his hands was a small ukulele, and on his face was an expression of pure childlike wonder. "Oh my goodness gracious, Mr. Presley," Tiny Tim said, his voice high and quavering with genuine emotion. "What an absolute honor this is. God bless you, sir. God bless you for all the joy you've brought to the world." Elvis found himself taken aback by the sincerity. Most performers who came backstage were calculating, measuring him up, looking for angles. This guy seemed genuinely starstruck. "Thanks, man. Nice to meet you. Colonel tells me you're in show business too." Tiny Tim clutched his ukulele closer to his chest, as if it were a security blanket. "Oh yes, sir. I sing the old songs, the beautiful songs from the golden age of American music. The 1890s through the 1930s, when love was put on an angelic throne, and music came from the heart." Elvis had been expecting the usual pitch, the familiar routine of small-time performers trying to impress him. Instead, Tiny Tim began talking about music with a knowledge that was both encyclopedic and passionate. "You know, Mr. Presley, your version of Love Me Tender owes a great debt to the parlor songs of the 1890s. The melody has roots in R. Lee, composed by George R. Polton in 1861, but the way you sing it, with that warm baritone, it reminds me of Henry Burr's style from 1915. He had this way of making every note sound like a prayer." Elvis stopped mid-sip of his Coca-Cola. Henry Burr, he'd never heard of the guy, but something about the way Tiny Tim spoke made him listen. "You know Henry Burr?" "Oh my, yes." Tiny Tim's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Henry Burr was one of the most recorded artists of his time. "Let me call you sweetheart, sweet Adeline, beautiful Ohio." His voice was pure honey, just like yours, Mr. Presley. But you have something he never had. You have the spirit of rebellion mixed with the sweetness. It's quite remarkable, really. The colonel was checking his watch, but Elvis waved him off. Something about this strange man was getting under his skin. "Play something," Elvis said suddenly. "You came here with that ukulele. Might as well let me hear what you do." Tiny Tim's face flushed with pleasure and terror. "Oh my goodness, you want me to perform for you? Right here? Oh dear, oh my. I'm not sure I'm worthy of such an honor. Just play something, man, whatever you want." Tiny Tim positioned his ukulele carefully, closed his eyes for a moment as if summoning courage from somewhere deep inside, and began to play. What came out was unlike anything Elvis had ever heard. The song was Tiptoe Through the Tulips, but the way Tiny Tim sang it was haunting, ethereal, like a voice from another century. His falsetto was crystal clear but trembling with genuine emotion, and every word was articulated with the precision of a Victorian gentleman reciting poetry. Elvis found himself mesmerized, not by the strangeness of it, but by the absolute authenticity. This wasn't a put-on or a gimmick. This man was channeling something real, something pure that had been lost in the modern world of rock and roll. When the song ended, the dressing room fell silent. "Where did you learn that?"
Elvis asked quietly. From the original recording, sir. Nick Lucas, 1929. I have a collection of over 40,078 RPM records and Edison cylinders. I spend my days at the New York Public Library studying the history of American popular music. I know every recording artist from 1890 to 1940, their techniques, their influences, their forgotten masterpieces. Elvis felt something shift inside him. Here was a man who treated music like archaeology, who preserved and honored the past while making it breathe again. What do you think about modern music? Rock and roll? Tiny Tim considered this carefully, his hands still resting on his ukulele. I think rock and roll has tremendous power, Mr. Presley. But sometimes I worry that in the rush to be loud and exciting, we forget the gentler emotions. Love, tenderness, sweetness. These are not old-fashioned ideas. They're eternal human needs. Your early ballads understood this. Love Me Tender. Can't Help Falling in Love. These songs have the same spirit as the great romantic songs of the 1920s. Elvis sat down heavily in his chair. Nobody had ever talked to him about his music this way before. Everyone wanted to discuss his gyrations, his controversy, his box office numbers. This weird little man was talking about his artistry. You ever hear of Arthur Johnston? Tiny Tim asked suddenly. Elvis shook his head. He wrote Pennies from Heaven in 1936. Beautiful melody, but what made it special was how Bing Crosby sang it. Not just the words, but the spaces between the words. The way he let silence carry as much weight as sound. You do the same thing, Mr. Presley. In Can't Help Falling in Love, those pauses you take, that's not just style, that's soul. Elvis felt his throat tighten. When was the last time someone had spoken to him about his music with such insight, such respect? Play something else, he said. Something I might know. Tiny Tim thought for a moment, then began the opening chords of My Blue Heaven, but he didn't sing it in his falsetto. Instead, in a rich, warm baritone that shocked Elvis, he sang the song exactly as it would have been performed in a speakeasy in 1927. Every note was perfect, every inflection authentic to the era. Elvis realized he was listening to a living archive of American music, a man who had absorbed decades of vocal tradition and could reproduce any style with stunning accuracy. Jesus, Elvis whispered when the song ended. You sing better than most of the cats in Nashville. Tiny Tim blushed deeply. Oh no, sir, I'm just a student. But thank you for the kind words. You know, Mr. Presley, I've always wondered what would happen if you sang some of the old standards. Your voice has such richness, such emotional depth. Have you ever considered recording I'll See You in My Dreams or Ain't She Sweet? Elvis had never heard of either song, but something in the way Tiny Tim suggested them made him curious. Show me how they go. For the next hour, Tiny Tim became Elvis's private music teacher. He played song after song from the 1920s and 1930s, explaining their history, their original performers, their place in the evolution of American popular music. Elvis listened with growing fascination as Tiny Tim revealed the threads that connected his rock and roll to the jazz age, the way his ballad style echoed the crooners of decades past. It was like discovering he'd been speaking a language he didn't know he knew. But what struck Elvis most was Tiny Tim's complete lack of cynicism. In an industry full of hustlers and manipulators, here was someone who approached music with pure love. When the Colonel finally interrupted to remind Elvis of his next show, something had fundamentally changed. As Tiny Tim prepared to leave, carefully placing his ukulele in its battered case, Elvis grabbed his arm. Wait, stick around tonight. I want you to watch the show from the wings, and after, maybe we can talk some more. Tiny Tim's eyes filled with tears. Oh my goodness, Mr. Presley, that would be the greatest honor of my life. God bless you, sir. God bless you for your kindness. As Tiny Tim was led to the backstage area, Elvis stood alone in his dressing room, looking at his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him looked different somehow. The rhinestone jumpsuit suddenly felt like a costume, a shiny barrier between him and the music he'd once loved so purely. He thought about Tiny Tim's words about Arthur Johnston, about letting silence carry weight, about the eternal human needs for love and tenderness. When had he stopped thinking about his music that way? When had it become just a job, a series of movements and sounds designed to trigger predictable responses from predictable audiences? That night, Elvis's performance was different. He couldn't put his finger on exactly how, but standing on the stage of the International Hotel, looking out at the sea of faces in the showroom, he found himself thinking about Henry Burr and Nick Lucas and all the forgotten singers Tiny Tim had mentioned. During Love Me Tender, he caught sight of Tiny Tim in the wings, watching with rapt attention, and suddenly Elvis heard his own voice, as if for the first time. The way he elongated certain words, the way he used silence and breath to create emotion, it was all connected to something larger than rock and roll, something that stretched back through generations of American singers. At that moment, Elvis made a decision that would change the trajectory of his career. Instead of launching into his usual closing number, he walked to the edge of the stage and did something he'd never done before. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying a new authority, "tonight I'd like to try something different. I'd like to sing a song from 1927. Some of you might remember it, some of you might not. But it's a beautiful song, and sometimes that's all that matters." The band looked confused as Elvis began singing My Blue Heaven exactly as Tiny Tim had taught him. No hip movements, no theatrical gestures, just pure vocal emotion delivered with the authenticity of the original era. The audience was stunned into silence at first, unsure how to react to this departure from the Elvis they expected. But as the song progressed, something magical happened. The showroom, which usually buzzed with the clink of glasses and whispered conversations, became perfectly quiet. People stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped everything except listening. Elvis was singing to them the way the great crooners had sung to their audiences 40 years earlier, intimately, personally, as if each person in the room was the only one who mattered. When he finished, the applause was different from his usual ovations. It was respectful, almost reverent, the kind of applause reserved for moments of genuine artistry. In the wings, Tiny Tim was crying openly, overwhelmed by what he'd witnessed. After the show, Elvis found him still standing there, tears streaming down his face. "That was magnificent, Mr. Presley," Tiny Tim said, his voice shaking. "You didn't just sing that song, you honored it, you made it live again." What followed was the beginning of an unlikely friendship that would profoundly influence both men. Over the next several months, whenever Elvis was in Vegas and Tiny Tim was in the area, they would meet in Elvis's dressing room for what they privately called their music history lessons. Tiny Tim would bring his collection of rare recordings, playing them on a portable record player, explaining the techniques and traditions that had shaped American popular music. Elvis soaked it all in like a sponge, discovering a musical heritage he'd never known existed. He learned about the parlor songs of the 1890s, the Tin Pan Alley composers, the jazz-age crooners, the swing-era balladeers. Each lesson deepened his understanding of his own place in the continuum of American music. But perhaps more importantly, Tiny Tim's genuine love for music, his complete lack of irony or calculation, reminded Elvis why he'd fallen in love with singing in the first place. Tiny Tim, for his part, was transformed by Elvis's acceptance and mentorship. The rock and roll king's willingness to learn from him, to take his knowledge seriously, gave him a confidence he'd never possessed. The impact on Elvis's career was immediate and lasting. His repertoire began to include carefully chosen standards from the 1920s and 1930s, performed with a new depth and understanding. Critics who had dismissed him as a relic noticed the change. His 1969 album From Elvis in Memphis included 3 songs Tiny Tim had introduced him to, performed with a subtlety and emotional intelligence that surprised even his most devoted fans. The album was acclaimed as an artistic rebirth, a return to the musical authenticity that had made Elvis special in the first place. For Tiny Tim, Elvis's friendship opened doors that had previously been closed. When Elvis recommended him to his record label, the result was Tiny Tim's breakthrough album God Bless Tiny Tim, which included Elvis playing piano on one track, a gesture of respect that meant more to Tim than any commercial success. More importantly, Elvis's validation gave Tiny Tim the confidence to appear on television shows as himself, not as a novelty act, but as a serious scholar and performer of American music history. The relationship between the two men might have seemed unlikely to outsiders, the king of rock and roll and the Victorian gentleman with the ukulele, but it made perfect sense to those who understood what they shared. Both were outsiders who had found acceptance through music. Both were serious students of their craft, who had been misunderstood by an industry that preferred simple categories to complex artistry. Both understood that authenticity was more important than commercial appeal, and that the greatest performances came from a place of genuine emotion rather than calculated effect. Their friendship lasted until Elvis's death in 1977. Tiny Tim was one of the few people outside Elvis's inner circle who was invited to Graceland regularly. He would sit in Elvis's music room, playing rare recordings and sharing stories about the forgotten masters of American popular music. Elvis in turn helped Tiny Tim understand how to connect with modern audiences without compromising his artistic integrity. When Elvis died, Tiny Tim was devastated. He had lost not just a friend, but the one person in the music industry who truly understood and valued his mission to preserve America's musical heritage. At Elvis's funeral, Tiny Tim performed My Blue Heaven, the song that had first connected them, in his purest falsetto, a farewell gift to the man who had seen past his eccentricity to his artistry. In the years that followed, until his own death in 1996, Tiny Tim would often speak about Elvis in interviews, but not about the hip-swiveling icon the public remembered. He spoke about the Elvis he had known privately, the serious student of music, the respectful preservationist of American vocal tradition, the artist who understood that true rebellion wasn't about breaking the rules, but about returning to the authentic emotions that the rules had been designed to protect. Elvis taught me that being different doesn't mean being alone, Tiny Tim said in one of his last interviews, and I like to think I taught him that being authentic doesn't mean being afraid of the past. We both learned that the most powerful thing any performer can do is simply tell the truth through their voice. The story of their friendship remained largely unknown to the public until after both men had died. But those who were privileged to witness their musical conversations always said the same thing. Watching Elvis Presley and Tiny Tim discuss the finer points of Henry Burr's vocal technique or debate the merits of different 1920s recording technologies was like seeing two archaeologists discover a lost civilization. They weren't just talking about music, they were uncovering the emotional DNA of America itself, finding the threads that connected the speakeasies of the jazz age to the concert halls of the present. In the end, their unlikely friendship proved something that the music industry, in its rush toward the next big thing, often forgets, that the most revolutionary act is often the simple preservation of beauty, the courageous decision to honor what came before while making it speak to what comes next. Elvis Presley met his time traveler on August 15, 1968, and discovered that the future of music might just lie in understanding its past.